You smell it before the bathroom light even turns on. That damp, sour smell where mold keeps returning no matter how many times you clean it. But frontier families in eastern Kentucky used a simple copper grounding wire beneath their homes to help keep dampness from settling into the walls in the first place. When Walter Boone showed me the original copper line his grandfather installed before World War I thought it was superstition. Then I found a 1911 USDA archive explaining why moisture was always the real problem. The first time I drove into Clay County, Kentucky, the fog was sitting low between the hills so thick I could barely see the fence lines along the road. About 7 miles outside Manchester, I pulled into the gravel driveway of a man named Walter Boone. Walter was 78 years old, tall, lean, suspenders hanging loose over a faded denim shirt, living alone in a chestnut wood cabin his grandfather built before the First World War. The thing I noticed first was the smell, or more accurately, the lack of one. The cabin sat beside a creek. The humidity outside was heavy enough to soak your shirt in 20 minutes. But inside that house, the air felt dry and cool. No mildew smell, no dampness, no mold around the windows. Not even inside the basement root cellar beneath the kitchen. Then I saw the wire. It ran low along the baseboard behind an iron stove. Thin, bare copper stapled against the wood beam before disappearing through a hole in the stone foundation. I asked Walter what it was. He looked at me like the answer should have been obvious and said, "Granddad called it the drain line. Said mountain homes sweat unless you give the wetness somewhere to go." Now, I thought that sounded like old folk superstition. I really did. But then Walter took me downstairs and showed me the original copper rod still buried beneath the foundation stones. Installed sometime during the Depression. Still there. Still dry. And I did not understand any of it until I started digging through old agricultural archives in Knoxville and Lexington. And when I found what I found, you will understand why nobody building modern homes talks about moisture the way these families once did. Subscribe now. The next part explains why this method disappeared after the 1950s. The modern mold industry makes money treating symptoms, not conditions. That is the first thing you need to understand. Most homeowners today are trapped inside a cycle that never really ends. First comes the damp smell, then the dark spots around the ceiling corners or window trim. Then somebody recommends bleach, mold spray, waterproof paint, or a dehumidifier that runs day and night pulling electricity from the wall while the real problem quietly stays hidden underneath. And despite all of it, the same stains usually come back. The same bathroom corner, the same basement wall, the same window frame every spring. Because mold is rarely the beginning of the problem. Moisture is. Even the Environmental Protection Agency openly states that the key to mold control is moisture control, not endless surface cleaning. That matters more than most people realize. Because modern homes are often designed to trap conditioned air as tightly as possible. Synthetic insulation, vapor barriers, sealed wall cavities, plastic-backed drywall, and limited airflow create spaces where humidity quietly builds behind surfaces long before homeowners ever notice visible mold. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Entire industries now depend on recurring moisture problems. Chemical cleaners, disposable moisture absorbers, air purification systems, waterproof coatings, replacement filters, even full mold remediation services costing thousands of dollars, while many homeowners still end up fighting the same problem again within a few years. But Appalachian settlers approached homes differently. They focused on airflow, breathable lumber, dry stone foundations, and moisture movement instead of constant chemical treatment. They understood something modern construction slowly forgot. When a home stays balanced and dry, mold often struggles to establish itself in the first place. And that is why some frontier cabins sitting beside creeks and river valleys survive generations without chronic mold problems, while many newer drywall homes begin trapping moisture within decades. And this next explains why copper kept appearing in homes built long before modern moisture control companies ever existed. The system itself was remarkably simple. A bare copper wire ran low along the dampest section of the home, usually basement walls, bathrooms, north-facing rooms, crawl spaces, or areas closest to stone foundations where condensation collected most heavily during wet seasons. That wire then extended outside through the wall and connected directly into moist earth using a buried copper grounding rod beside the foundation. No electricity, no machine humming in the corner, no filters to replace every month, no chemical treatment soaking into the walls. Frontier families believe the system helped stabilize damp conditions inside the structure by giving excess condensation and trapped moisture a passive path away from the home itself. They called it drawing the wetness out. And what stopped me cold was how many mountain homes repeated the same setup almost identically despite being built decades apart. Now, here is where most people stop, and if you do only what I have shown you so far, you may already notice less dampness over time. But there is another reason copper matters here. Modern research still confirms that copper surfaces naturally inhibit certain bacteria and fungal activity under the right environmental conditions. That does not mean a copper wire magically destroys every mold spore inside a house. But it does explain why older Americans repeatedly used copper around wells, roofs, storage spaces, gutters, and damp environments long before modern plastics replaced it almost everywhere. The old settlers understood something simple. Moisture problems become worse when humid air stays trapped inside stagnant spaces for long periods of time. Dampness settles into wood. Walls stop breathing. Condensation builds layer by layer until the structure itself begins holding moisture longer than it should. And when I asked Walter Boone why his grandfather trusted the copper line so much, he looked at the wall beside the stove and said something I wrote down immediately. You do not fight the mold itself. You stop the wall from staying wet long enough to welcome it. That sentence stayed with me because it explains the difference between temporary cleaning and environmental control better than most modern advertisements ever do. Here is why nobody talks about this anymore. And no, it is not a conspiracy. It is worse than that. A conspiracy you can fight. A system you cannot see is harder to fight because it just feels like the way things are. The mold remediation industry in the United States now generates billions of dollars every year. Chemical treatment manufacturers profit from recurring product use. Appliance companies profit from dehumidifiers running year-round. Construction companies profit replacing damaged drywall, insulation, framing, and ventilation systems. There is no financial reward in teaching homeowners a one-time passive system that might reduce recurring moisture conditions for decades, especially when older American homes were originally built to breathe differently in the first place. And this is where modern construction changed everything. After the 1950s, American homes became increasingly sealed with synthetic barriers, tighter insulation systems, vapor layers, adhesives, and manufactured wall assemblies designed around climate control machinery instead of natural environmental balance. But frontier cabins did the opposite. They released moisture slowly, they interacted with earth naturally, and they used conductive materials like copper, ash, stone, lime, and old-growth lumber to stabilize dampness before it became trapped inside the walls. Before I give you the final piece, you need to see exactly how these families installed the system themselves. Go to the electrical section of almost any hardware store. Buy a 20-foot roll of number 10 bare solid copper wire, usually around $15 today. Buy one 4-foot copper grounding rod. Buy one brass grounding clamp. Find the wall in your house where dampness constantly returns. Bathrooms work best. Basement corners, north-facing rooms, areas beside old windows. Run the wire low along the baseboard, as close to the floor as possible. Staple it every 16 inches. Keep the line continuous. Drill a small exit hole through the wall near the floor. Drive the grounding rod 4 feet into moist soil outside the house as close to the foundation as possible. Clamp the copper wire directly to the rod. That is it. No power connection, no electrical panel, no maintenance. You can do this weekend. And here is what most people notice week by week. The first week, the room smells less damp. By the second week, condensation along windows and corners often decreases. By the third week, recurring dark spotting usually stops spreading. And by the fourth week, many homeowners notice the room simply feels drier without constantly running machines. 3 years ago, inside the basement archive collection at the University of Tennessee Agricultural Library, I found a boxed collection of sanitation circulars published between 1908 and 1915 for rural Appalachian communities. And inside that collection sat a 1911 field bulletin written by USDA Inspector Samuel Whitaker titled Moisture Regulation in Mountain Dwellings. I held the original document in my hands. And buried halfway through the report was a section describing conductive grounding methods used by eastern Kentucky and Tennessee settlers to reduce persistent dampness inside hillside homes. Whitaker wrote, "Cabins utilizing grounded copper conductors along foundation interiors demonstrated noticeably drier wall conditions during spring thaw periods compared with enclosed ungrounded structures nearby. That matters, because it proves this was never just folklore. It was practical frontier engineering, not superstition, not internet theory. Real people living in wet mountain valleys developed passive systems modern construction slowly abandoned because machines eventually became more profitable than simplicity. And when I closed that archive box, I remember sitting there thinking about how many homeowners today believe mold is simply unavoidable because nobody ever showed them another way to think about moisture itself. Now, some people listening to this are probably thinking, is this even safe? Yes, because this system does not connect to your home's electrical panel in any way. It functions more like a passive grounding path similar to lightning grounding principles already used around older structures. Others will say, my house is newer than those cabins. That is true, but moisture still behaves according to environmental conditions, regardless of construction year. Bathrooms, basements, and sealed corners in newer homes can still benefit from passive grounding systems. And then there is the third objection. My contractor said this makes no sense. And honestly, many contractors probably will say that. Not because they are dishonest. Most are simply trained around modern building systems, code structures, ventilation standards, and manufactured moisture management products, not historical frontier methods that disappeared generations ago. And if you are still unsure, here is the one thing I would ask you to try first. Install it in one small room that constantly struggles with dampness and pay attention to what changes over the next month. Because older Americans did not keep repeating methods for generations unless those methods consistently solved real problems. Your grandparents lived in homes without filter subscriptions, moisture machines humming day and night, or shelves full of chemical sprays. And somehow many of those homes survived wetter conditions than modern houses do today. You did not lose this knowledge accidentally. It disappeared one hardware aisle at a time, one construction shortcut at a time, one generation at a time. There is now a growing group of Americans quietly rediscovering the practical systems frontier families once considered ordinary. People tired of being sold endless maintenance for problems older generations often prevented with simplicity instead. So I want to ask you something. Which room in your house keeps fighting moisture or mold no matter what you try? The bathroom? The basement? That one window corner that always darkens first? Write it in the comments below because I read every one of them. And in the next video, I am going to show you a forgotten Ozark well water method I found in a 1924 Missouri Extension archive that settlers used to reduce bacteria, copper residue, and heavy mineral buildup using nothing but hardwood ash and limestone. I will see you there. Forgotten things have a way of surviving. You just have to know where to look.